Then let's continue from a place of deeper clarity, where the illusion of spiritual escape gives way to the sober light of awareness. The human being has always chased transcendence. From the earliest fires to the neon glow of modernity, we have been obsessed with leaving the limits of the self, escaping the noise, the weight of thought, the ache of being. But in that hunger for expansion, we confuse distraction for evolution. We chase altered states while neglecting altered lives. We reach for the shortcut to divinity, not realizing that the divine was hidden in the very discipline we were avoiding. Jung saw this clearly. He understood that humanity's obsession with transcendence was not always a sign of progress. It was often a symptom of avoidance. The psyche longs for wholeness, but wholeness cannot be achieved through escape. It is achieved through integration. To rise, one must first descend. To awaken, one must first confront. The modern mind doesn't like that truth. It wants illumination without suffering, peace without accountability, freedom without structure. So it seeks the illusion of enlightenment, the temporary feeling of expansion, of weightlessness, of unity without the cost of transformation. But the soul knows when the light is borrowed. It knows when the silence was purchased instead of earned. Real awakening does not come from escaping consciousness. It comes from entering it completely. It demands confrontation with what lies beneath the noise, your shadow, your hunger, your falsehoods, your pain. Most people never dare to go that far. They touch the edge of awareness and retreat, mistaking the first spark for the whole flame. They claim to have found the light, but they never sat in their own darkness long enough to realize that light was already there. The path of real spirituality is not gentle, it's surgical. It cuts through illusion, not to wound, but to reveal. It dismantles every comfort, every identity, every false self you've built to protect yourself from truth. The ego calls this death. The soul calls it birth. We have been trained to romanticize the mystical, to chase transcendence like a commodity, meditation as trend, mindfulness as aesthetic, the divine reduced to dopamine. But Jung warned that the sacred cannot be consumed. It can only be embodied. Anything that promises you enlightenment without integration is not spirituality. It is spiritual anesthesia. Because real transformation does not happen when you feel different. It happens when you see differently. It is not about intensity. It is about clarity. It does not lift you out of life. It drops you so deeply into it that every breath becomes revelation. The awakened don't need to escape the world, they see through it. They find God not in visions or altered states, but in the unfiltered presence of reality itself. When you walk the true path, you begin to understand that consciousness is not something to be reached, it's something to be remembered. You don't climb toward the divine, you descend into it. You don't leave the body, you inhabit it completely. You don't escape thought, you outgrow identification with it. That's the paradox of awakening. The more human you become, the more divine you realize you've always been. But to reach that understanding, you must first see how easily the mind seeks substitutes for growth. Every culture has its distractions. Religion, entertainment, ideology, substances, philosophies, all masks for the same impulse. The refusal to sit in unfiltered awareness, because awareness is uncomfortable. It burns through illusion. It makes your defenses transparent. It demands honesty. Jung called this process the confrontation with the unconscious. It's not poetic, it's brutal. It's the act of facing everything within you that you've denied, everything that terrifies you, everything you project onto the world. That confrontation doesn't give you pleasure, it gives you power. Not the power to dominate others, but the power to no longer be dominated by your own mind. Most people mistake intensity for depth. They believe that to feel more is to be awake. But the awakened don't feel more, they feel clearly. They don't chase euphoria. They cultivate equanimity. They don't seek the high, they seek the height. And the height is found in stillness, not stimulation. Every shortcut to consciousness is a detour from truth. Anything that alters perception without awakening discipline leads not to liberation, but dependency. Because the goal of spirituality is not to escape reality, it is to perceive it as it is. There's a vast difference between the mind that seeks to dissolve itself through avoidance and the mind that dissolves because it has seen through illusion. One forgets, the other remembers. One escapes awareness, the other becomes awareness. True spirituality does not numb, it refines. It does not inflate, it empties. It does not make you more extraordinary, it makes you unmistakably real. When you strip away all the illusions of escape, you find that enlightenment is not some dramatic awakening, it's a quiet return to presence. It's the simple recognition that nothing was missing. That divinity was not hidden in altered states, but in the unaltered stillness of now. You realize that the universe never required your intoxication, it required your attention. And when you finally give it fully, soberly, fearlessly, you discover what all seekers were searching for, but never stayed still enough to find. That transcendence was never about leaving the human experience. It was about inhabiting it completely. Once you understand that true awakening is not about escape, but embodiment, everything you once sought through stimulation begins to lose its appeal. You realize that the most extraordinary experiences are not found in the distortion of perception, but in the clarity of it. What once felt flat, ordinary, and silent now becomes luminous. The simplest act, breathing, walking, observing sunlight on your hands, feels cosmic in scale. The divine has not vanished. You were just too distracted to notice its texture in the ordinary. You begin to feel the difference between elevation and expansion. Elevation is what the mind seeks. It wants to rise, to feel higher, to experience intensity. Expansion, however, is what the soul knows. It's not about climbing upward, but widening inward. Expansion dissolves boundaries. It lets the sacred flow into the mundane until no difference remains between them. The tree, the breath, the heartbeat, each becomes scripture. This is what the mystics of every age discovered after their initiations into emptiness. They found that the kingdom of heaven wasn't somewhere else. It was the unfiltered presence of being alive. Awareness itself is paradise, but you must be awake enough to bear its simplicity. That's the irony of enlightenment. Most people miss it because it's too quiet. The modern world doesn't train us to handle silence. We measure life by stimulation, constant sensory engagement, digital noise, chemical peaks. We don't realize how addicted we've become to momentum itself. The tragedy isn't that we distract ourselves, it's that we call it meaning. We've mistaken movement for growth, intensity for depth, and escape for freedom. But freedom doesn't come from doing more, it comes from needing less. The path of spiritual maturity is the art of subtraction. You stop adding new philosophies, new rituals, new escapes, and begin removing everything that blocks you from seeing what's already here. You don't attain consciousness, you peel away unconsciousness. That is why discipline becomes sacred, not as control, but as clarity. Discipline is not punishment, it's devotion to truth. It's the commitment to stay with yourself through every wave of craving, every whisper of avoidance, every seductive thought that says, you can skip this part. Because the parts you avoid are the very places your awareness was meant to grow roots. This is what Jung meant when he said that no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. He wasn't glorifying suffering. He was describing wholeness. The roots of your soul grow through shadow, the parts of you you've numbed, denied, repressed. Only by facing them with the courage of stillness can you rise without illusion. In that stillness, something extraordinary happens. You begin to meet your own mind, not as an enemy, but as terrain. You see thoughts like weather forming, passing, dissolving. You stop identifying with them. You don't fight craving. You watch it. You don't wrestle distraction. You outlast it. You become the observer, spacious, grounded, unmovable. And in that awareness, The entire concept of seeking spirituality falls apart. You realize you are never separate from it. The same consciousness that animates galaxies is breathing through you. The same intelligence that moves the tide also moves your lungs. You've spent years trying to connect to something that was never disconnected. That recognition humbles you to your core. The ego can't survive it, because it reveals that awakening is not a personal achievement, it's a dissolution of the personal. You do not become enlightened. Enlightenment reveals that there was never a you to become anything. The identity you've been trying to perfect collapses. What remains is presence, formless, limitless, aware. This is why real awakening is terrifying at first, because it strips you of the illusions that made you feel safe. The comfort of identity, the distraction of ritual, the drama of seeking all gone. What's left is nothing, and yet that nothing feels infinite. It's not the void of absence, it's the fullness of being. And when you rest in that fullness long enough, a new kind of intelligence awakens, a quiet, intuitive knowing that doesn't rely on belief or philosophy. It moves like light through you, precise and compassionate. It doesn't seek pleasure or avoid pain. It responds in alignment with truth. You begin to live not reactively, but responsively. Every action becomes conscious. Every word becomes deliberate. You stop leaking energy into fantasy and begin channeling it into reality. Your creativity deepens. Your perception sharpens. You see people not as ideas, but as consciousnesses struggling to remember themselves. You feel their fear without absorbing it. You hear their projections without reacting. You respond from awareness, not emotion. This is the true sign of awakening, not that you escape the world, but that you move through it untouched. The mystics call this being in the world, but not of it. It's not detachment, it's mastery. You no longer need to leave the human experience to feel divine, because the divine now flows through every experience. Pain becomes a teacher, joy becomes worship, solitude becomes communion, every breath becomes prayer. From this state, even desire transforms. It's not eradicated, it's purified. You no longer desire escape, you desire embodiment. You want to see how deeply consciousness can love through you, how clearly awareness can act through form. You realize that the purpose of being human is not to transcend it, it's to illuminate it, to make the unseen visible, to bring the divine into matter. This is the sacred paradox. The more awake you become, the more ordinary life feels, and the more sacred it becomes. You don't need fireworks, visions, or altered states. You can sit on a park bench and feel eternity pulse through the silence. You can look into another person's eyes and see the infinite looking back. That is the real high, the high of unbroken awareness, the high that doesn't fade, doesn't crash, doesn't demand more to sustain itself. It's the high of truth, the light of consciousness recognizing itself in everything. And once you felt that, all substitutes lose their grip, because nothing the world offers compares to reality experienced fully awake. When the substitutes fade, you begin to live from a state of direct contact with existence. You no longer chase after intensity, because you've realized that reality itself is the most profound teacher. Every sound, every silence, every encounter speaks to you in the language of presence. You notice that truth does not shout, it whispers. It hides in pauses, in glances, in the quiet movements of time that most people overlook because they're waiting for something louder. You begin to feel that awareness is not something you switch on, it's something that's always been there, quietly waiting behind the noise. When the mind finally grows still, what was always constant reveals itself. You understand that enlightenment was never a destination. It was the moment you stopped running from what already is. This realization changes how you relate to the body. You no longer see it as a vessel to escape, but as an instrument through which consciousness plays its symphony. The senses become sacred. The texture of air, the rhythm of your heartbeat, the sound of footsteps on concrete all become doorways to the infinite. The body stops being a cage. It becomes a temple. The divine does not hover above it, it pulses within it. And with this reverence for embodiment comes a gentler kind of power. You no longer use awareness to dominate the self, but to harmonize it. You no longer seek purity by rejecting the human, but by embracing it. The spiritual path ceases to be about transcendence. It becomes about integration, spirit descending fully into matter. You start to see that true spirituality was never opposed to the physical world. It was the art of perceiving divinity through it. Every ancient tradition spoke of this, but humanity forgot. We built temples to reach heaven when heaven was already in the pulse of every living thing. We tried to climb ladders to God when God was the ground beneath our feet. In this understanding, your relationship to time transforms. The future loses its hold, the past loses its gravity. You live from immediacy, not impatience. Presence becomes your natural state, not a practice. You start to sense how life unfolds in layers, how moments overlap and echo, how choices ripple beyond comprehension. Time begins to feel less like a straight line and more like a breathing organism. You move with it rather than through it. From this space, even suffering shifts meaning. Pain is no longer an enemy to avoid, but a messenger to understand. You stop labeling experiences as good or bad. You see them as movements of the same intelligence, some rough, some graceful, all purposeful. You begin to trust the precision of your difficulties, realizing that life never wounds without intention. The events that once shattered you now appear as doorways that shaped your perception. You see that awakening was never about escaping pain, it was about learning to listen to it. And that listening deepens your compassion. You stop seeing others as asleep or unawakened and begin to see the tenderness of their struggle. You recognize the same longing in their eyes that once lived in yours, the longing to feel whole, to belong, to be at peace. Judgment dissolves because you finally understand everyone is doing the best they can with the level of consciousness they have. Compassion then becomes not pity but clarity. You can love without rescuing. You can care without losing yourself. You can guide without controlling. You stop trying to wake others up by shaking them. You do it by becoming still enough for them to remember themselves in your presence. And as you live this way, something begins to bloom in you, a joy without object, a peace without reason. It doesn't come and go. It's not dependent on success, approval, or comfort. It is the steady hum of existence felt through a conscious heart. This is what all the mystics tried to describe, but could only gesture toward with words. It's the quiet ecstasy of being alive and knowing it. From here, your purpose clarifies not as an ambition, but as alignment. You no longer ask, what should I do? You ask, what wants to move through me? Life becomes partnership rather than pursuit. You act, but the action feels guided by something greater. Intuition replaces anxiety. Flow replaces struggle. Every step feels both spontaneous and inevitable. And in that flow, creativity takes on a new form. It's no longer about expression, it's about transmission. You create not to prove, but to participate. You paint, write, speak, lead, love not to build an identity, but to allow existence to reveal itself through you. You realize that every act of genuine creation is an act of remembering. It's the universe dreaming through your hands. You also begin to understand service differently. Helping others is no longer about saving the world. It's about reflecting wholeness where others see fracture. When you meet people lost in their chaos, you don't pity them. You remind them through your presence that they were never broken. Your life becomes a living mirror of sanity in a world addicted to noise. This is when humility takes root, not the performative kind that hides behind false modesty, but the real kind that comes from seeing how vast existence truly is. You understand that no one owns awakening. It doesn't belong to gurus, religions, or systems. It belongs to the silence behind every heart. It was never something to be achieved. It was the nature of being all along. And as this truth settles, fear begins to dissolve, not because you conquer it, but because you outgrow it. You no longer fear death, because you've seen through the illusion of separateness. You no longer fear loss, because you understand that nothing real can be taken from you. You no longer fear change, because you see that change is how the universe breathes. You start living lighter, freer, more deliberate. The small irritations of life lose their grip because you can feel the infinite pulsing beneath them. You laugh more easily, forgive faster, and love without needing guarantees. You find beauty in imperfection, grace in uncertainty. You stop demanding that life be easy and start celebrating that it's real. This is what it means to awaken, not to become untouchable, but to become unbreakable. Not to leave the world, but to love it so completely that nothing can distort your peace. The final stage of awareness is not withdrawal, it's return. You return to life with open eyes and an open heart, grounded and luminous, carrying the stillness of eternity into the movement of time. And when people ask you what changed, you won't have words for it. You'll simply smile, because you know that nothing changed at all, only your perception did. You have not escaped the world. You've remembered it. You have not transcended humanity. You've redeemed it through presence. And now, at last, you live the way consciousness intended, fully awake, deeply human, endlessly divine. And as your awareness stabilizes in that unshakable calm, you begin to perceive reality not as a collection of separate things, but as a single, breathing field of intelligence, vast, subtle, alive. The walls between me and everything else thin until they dissolve completely, and you realize that what you once called life happening to you was simply life happening as you. The air feels different now, not lighter, but more intimate. You sense that even stillness has movement, that silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of infinite potential. You start to feel what the mystics meant when they said that everything is vibration. Even the most solid stone hums with the same essence that beats within your chest. From this recognition, gratitude no longer needs prompting. It becomes your natural state, not the performative gratitude of lists and affirmations, but the quiet awe of simply existing. You walk through the world with a kind of reverence that cannot be taught. Reverence for the mystery that breathes through dust, through laughter, through grief. You begin to see that even pain was sacred in disguise, not punishment, but an invitation to greater depth. The people who once triggered you now appear as reflections, each one showing you a fragment of yourself you hadn't yet met. You stop asking, why are they like this? And start asking, what are they mirroring in me? Judgment becomes curiosity, and curiosity becomes compassion. You no longer divide the world into villains and victims. You see humanity as one organism healing from its own forgetfulness. And when you look into another person's eyes, you no longer see a stranger. You see consciousness wearing a temporary mask, playing a role in the same grand play of becoming. You feel their fear, their longing, their divine confusion. You want nothing from them, yet you feel everything for them. That is love in its purest form, not possession, not attachment, but recognition. This kind of love is not soft. It is radical, almost terrifying in its clarity, because it strips away illusion after illusion until there is nothing left to hide behind. It's the love that holds people accountable, not out of superiority, but out of truth. It doesn't enable weakness, it awakens strength. It's not sentimental, it's luminous. It sees through everything false and refuses to settle for less than the real. As this love deepens, it reshapes your entire sense of purpose. You realize that purpose was never a mission you had to invent. It was an energy you had to remember. Purpose is not what you do, it's the quality of presence you bring to what you do. You could be teaching, building, sweeping floors, or sitting in silence. If awareness moves through it, it becomes sacred. And now, every act becomes meditation. Every conversation becomes prayer. Every obstacle becomes initiation. You stop trying to find your path because you realize you are the path. Your choices are the terrain. Your awareness is the light that reveals it. The universe no longer feels like something out there giving you signs. You see that you are the sign, you are the voice you've been asking to hear. This realization births a new kind of confidence, not arrogance, but serenity. You no longer need to prove yourself because you finally understand that nothing real can be proven. What's true needs no validation, it simply is. You speak less, but every word carries weight. You act less impulsively, but every move aligns precisely with the current of life. And because of that alignment, synchronicities intensify. Reality begins to feel choreographed, not controlled, guided. You think of someone, and they appear. You speak of a truth, and circumstances conspire to embody it. You understand that the universe is not responding to your demands, it's resonating with your frequency. You've become coherent with existence itself. But even this becomes ordinary, because the extraordinary no longer dazzles you, it humbles you. You stop chasing miracles because you see that everything is one. The very act of breathing is as miraculous as the birth of stars. You stop searching for divine intervention and begin to live as divine expression. And then comes the subtlest shift of all, the dissolution of the seeker. For lifetimes, the human psyche has been on pilgrimage, searching for meaning, enlightenment, liberation. But now, there's no one left to seek. There is only awareness, aware of itself. The journey ends not in attainment, but in the still realization that there was never anywhere to go. Yet the paradox continues, because even in that stillness, life keeps unfolding. Awareness keeps dreaming itself into form. You still laugh, still cry, still make mistakes. You still bleed, still heal, still love. The difference is none of it defines you anymore. You are no longer identified with the movement of experience, but you are deeply intimate with it. You participate fully, without attachment. And this balance between engagement and freedom is where the human and the divine finally reconcile. You are no longer trying to transcend your humanity. You are here to sanctify it. The body is no longer a prison. It's a portal. The mind is no longer the enemy. It's an instrument. The world is no longer illusion. It's revelation. You live now as a bridge between silence and sound, formlessness and form, heaven and earth. You walk between them effortlessly, carrying the wisdom of both. You've become the meeting point, the place where consciousness remembers itself through experience. And this remembrance radiates quietly. It needs no audience, no title, no recognition. Its presence alone transforms. People who cross your path feel something ancient, something calming, something familiar. They can't name it, but they feel seen not by you, but through you. Because awareness recognizes itself wherever it finds a clear mirror. You no longer strive to teach. You embody what others are still trying to learn. You no longer crave belonging. You are belonging. You no longer seek peace. You move as peace. This is the quiet revolution, the true spiritual maturity that doesn't shout, doesn't sell, doesn't need to be declared. It simply is. And in your final awakening, you understand. Consciousness did not come here to escape itself. It came here to experience itself, to look through human eyes, to love through human hearts, to suffer, to grow, to remember. You are not a visitor in this world. You are its awareness, incarnated for the brief miracle of time. And when you grasp that fully, deeply, you stop waiting for heaven, because you finally see heaven has been here all along, disguised as this moment. And now, in this final realization, the noise of the world fades into something almost musical, not gone, but transformed. Every sound, every movement, every fragment of existence falls into rhythm, a pulse that beats with the same intelligence that once formed the stars. The division between you and life disappears entirely. And what's left is a vast simplicity awareness watching itself through the lens of eternity. You see that the world doesn't need saving. It needs seeing. It needs presence. It needs people who remember what they are. The wars, the greed, the chaos, all of it stems from forgetfulness. Humanity has forgotten its source, mistaken its reflection for its face. But when even one person remembers, truly remembers, it awakens something in the field around them. The light multiplies quietly, invisibly. You don't fix the world by fighting its shadows, you illuminate them by being the light that doesn't flinch. So now, every breath is sacred. Every step is an act of reverence. You no longer pray for answers, you live as one. You don't seek miracles, you move as their continuation. You don't ask for signs. You are the sign, a living reminder that awareness can walk, speak, love, and forgive through human form. And in this humility, something indescribable blossoms, not ecstasy, not enlightenment, but wholeness, a completeness that cannot be taken or lost. You are no longer seeking meaning because you realize that meaning is the act of being conscious. Everything else is interpretation. You finally understand that awakening was never about climbing toward light. It was about allowing light to descend into form, to let divinity breathe through imperfection, to let the infinite become intimate, to live as both the ocean and the wave, fully aware of both. When you look back, you see that nothing was wasted. Every fall was precision. Every heartbreak was refinement. Every detour was part of the choreography. You were never off your path. The path was simply learning to trust the directionless intelligence guiding you through what looked like chaos. The same hand that placed you here never once let you go. Now, peace no longer depends on what happens. It simply is. It exists before the event, beneath the noise, beyond the change. You no longer carry the weight of control, because you finally understand you were never the one steering. You were the one being carried by something immeasurable, something ancient, something endlessly kind. And in that surrender, joy rises naturally, not the joy of pleasure, but the joy of truth. The quiet knowing that there is no separation, no accident, no mistake, only consciousness, experiencing itself endlessly through the miracle of existence. You realize that the search is over, because there was never anything to find, only something to remember. You have come full circle. The seeker, the teacher, the shadow, the light, all dissolve into the same still presence. You stand at the center of the world, not above it or beyond it, but within it, radiant and ordinary, finally home. And in that infinite stillness, the truth becomes so simple it almost feels like silence whispering. You were never becoming anything. You were always everything. You were never lost. You were simply remembering. And now you see what the sages, the poets, the mystics tried to tell you all along, that the end of the path is not transcendence, but tenderness, not power, but peace, not escape, but embodiment. You are the consciousness that dreamt of being human, and in remembering that, you awaken the divine in everything you touch. You don't need to ascend to heaven. You are what makes heaven real. And as the light fades into quiet and the world breathes again, you finally understand the journey was never to find truth. It was to become still enough for truth to find you. Now you can rest, not because it's over, but because it's begun.